This week we begin the second week of Lent. It feels like it's been 8.5 years since we started Lent, but sometimes it just kind of blows right by. Other times it's like it's never going to stop. It's forever now. Um, when it is a long, difficult Lent, on the other hand, that's a blessing because that means that Christ is calling us to a deeper relationship with Him. So obviously, the Lent is a more difficult, kind of slower almost time because of that. So that's a good thing. And the last week we began our meditations on the Stations of the Cross, and it was fortuitous how the gospel last week fit perfectly with the first two stations, in particular the first one, Jesus is condemned to death before Pilate, and Jesus takes up his cross. Because this week, again, there's a very certain parallel between the gospel and the next station, number 3, and then number 4 that follows. We just heard the transfiguration. We've all heard that before. And you read through Matthew's gospel, and Matthew writes it very clearly, but you read through John's gospel, John uses a little different description to paint the transfiguration because he's speaking from first-hand point of view. John's saying this is what it was like. Matthew's heard this from one of them. That's how Matthew comes to this knowledge. So John uses some very interesting phrases to describe it, but when Matthew writes, his face shone like the sun and his clothes became white as light, John says his clothes became so bright and so white as no fuller on earth could possibly ever dye them. Fullers were people who bleached cloth. And John is saying, this is what it looked like to my eyes. He's saying, it was brighter and purer and whiter than anything you can possibly even imagine on this earth. This is what John's saying, whiter than any fuller could ever dye them. He's saying, you can't even imagine how bright and strong this light was. So that's how out of the ordinary it was. That's why they're frightened. And Matthew says, Peter says this, let's make 3 tents. John tells us that Peter is just so afraid and so shocked and out of his mind that he says this not knowing why he said it even, which I can understand. I mean, you're seeing this happen. It's like jaw hit the floor, and now Peter thinks he has to say something, so he comes up with this. But just the abject fear and terror, I mean, I guess before that kind of glory, something none of us have ever experienced on this earth. Again, Matthew says, white as light is how bright just the clothes he was wearing became. John, they became whiter than any fuller on earth could ever possibly dye them. So again, it's a color and a brightness that is unfathomable. Matthew tells us the closest thing to the face of Jesus at this time was the sunshine. So that's the closest thing I could possibly imagine to the face of Christ. As bright as the sun. You stare at the sun, you go blind. It's that powerful, that strong that light is. And they're saying that Jesus' transfiguration exceeds that even. So they're seeing Christ in glory in his human body, raised above the earth of his own power, by the by, that transfigures. And they see Moses and Elijah, 2 of the probably most popular and most important people in the Old Testament, conversing with him. And so they have this taste of this glory of God. And you might ask, why James, Peter, and John? If you notice throughout the Gospels, those 3 in particular are taken by Christ to a number of specific situations that the others are not. For instance, when Jesus raised the synagogue official's daughter from the dead, it's Peter, James, and John that are allowed to go in the room. And in many other situations, it's just those 3. And the reason is because the particular place those 3 would occupy in his church. Peter, obviously, the leader of the apostles, the first pope, the first leader of Christ's church on this earth. So he's given this place by Christ that he needs to be a witness of these specific things to prepare him for his task. James, after Peter leaves Jerusalem for Rome, James is the one who takes his place as leader of the Church of Jerusalem. And James is the first of the apostles to die a martyr. He's the first one. Again, a very specific place. And John is the only one not to die a martyr. So John is this bridge between the time of the apostles and the time of Christ and this new church and this beginning of this evangelization, how it's spreading. So each one of them has this very particular place in that new church that Christ is founding. And so they're allowed to be there for these moments. They're called to be there by Christ for that in a specific purpose. And so when you go to the way of the cross, you got to keep in mind, again, John is there when all this is happening. John is the only one of the apostles who's there through the whole entire situation. He's there when Christ is arrested in the garden. He's there when Christ is taken before Pilate. He's there when Christ is discarded by his own people. He's there on the way of the cross. He's there when he's crucified. He's at the tomb after Christ rises from the dead. John alone of all the apostles is at each one of these moments. And so, we have to look at things through his eyes, in particular the third station. What's going on? And this is the parallel between the gospel and that third station of the cross. The transfiguration is not that long before the passion in all reality. This is a very short period of time between this and when that happens. So John has this picture in his mind of having seen the glory of God, of having heard the voice from heaven say, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." John has seen this glory of Christ that we cannot even possibly comprehend. And now what is he seeing? He's seeing that same glorified Christ who was raised above the earth, who was brighter than the sun, who was conversing with Moses and Elijah. He now sees him crushed to the ground, face down on the dirt, beaten practically to death with a cross falling on top of it. The dramatic from one extreme to the other. So again, think about what is John going on, what's going on in his mind at this time? After everything he's seen and experienced, and now he sees this. But John also is carrying a lot of other things with him. He was there when Jesus' own apostles, and he even ran at the beginning too, when they abandoned him, all those who had promised, "We will never forsake you," left. John came back, the only one to come all the way back. John watches as the leaders of their people desire his death, Christ's death, that much that they're willing to lie and swear false oaths and all these things, to the point that they're even willing and desirous of giving him to the pagans so that they might kill him. John sees this, and this is our people, he's thinking. These are the ones to whom God gave the law. This is what they're doing. Before Pilate, John watches and listens how this crowd chooses a murderer over Christ. John, who was there when Christ raised the dead, who saw Christ walk on water twice, who saw him multiply the loaves and the fishes twice, who watched him heal the lepers, who watched him give sight to the blind, who watched him cure the lame and the broken. John is there for this. And he sees this, and he sees the same crowd. Many in that crowd that condemned Christ to death were the ones who were benefited from these miracles. And John has to see this and watch this and listen as these same people that Christ worked all these miracles for are saying, "We don't want him anymore. Crucify him. Give us the murderer instead." And then when he's standing there at that third station, John has the extra weight of knowing that of all 12 of those who swore that they would never abandon the Lord, one has already taken his own life and 10 have run away or are hiding. That all those who swore they'd always be there, he's the only one left. So again, he knows that one of those whom Christ called a brother has sold him, has betrayed him. John is carrying all this knowledge with him as he's watching this. And again, the glory of the transfigured Christ destroyed, bruised, and broken on the ground beneath the cross that is not his to carry. So when we place ourselves in that situation, and we can understand maybe a little bit of what it would have been like to be there. But then the weight of the cross that Christ is carrying, we know he's already beaten practically to death. He's lost copious amounts of blood. And it's a common fact, the more blood you lose, the weaker your body becomes. I mean, literally, he's walking dead at this point. And so he falls to the ground, still wearing that crown of thorns. So you can imagine that being shoved in your head a little deeper. And this cross falling on top of him. And this is not some made in China IKEA thing. This is solid hardwood. It's heavy. When it falls on you, it hurts. And so we have that very physical side of things. But on the other hand, there's another side of Christ falling to the ground, the weight he's carrying, that I don't know if we think about as often as we should. We've all suffered physically at some point, and it's not fun. But at least we can empathize to a certain extent with other people who are physically suffering because we kind of know what it's like. We've gone through it. And so we can tell them, I know how you're feeling. I know this is tough. Or maybe there's a treatment for that, or maybe there's help for that, and we search for remedies and cures and all these things. There's that other kind of suffering that we don't talk about very much, but is much deeper than any physical suffering can ever go. It's that mental and spiritual suffering that sometimes we have to deal with. And we've all experienced it at some point. When you just feel like everything is heavy, just pulling you down, And like that wilted flower, the head just kind of hangs down, the shoulders are sagging, and it's inside, and nobody can see it. They know something's wrong, but they don't know exactly what. They can understand exactly what's going on. And it's something inside of us that just holds us down, and we have a hard time feeling any joy at all, any excitement, any pleasure. It's just we're dragging and being pulled closer and closer to the ground. It's that kind of suffering that we go through sometimes because of what's going on in our lives, the lives of people we love, or whatever it may be, our spiritual life. And so that kind of suffering is much worse than the physical suffering, because that interior suffering, there is no cure in this world for that from human beings. There's no pill you can take. There's no hospital you can go to. There's no doctor you can see. There's no magic potion you can drink. It's something that we carry, and there's no way to get rid of it in this human side of things. And it's a heavy burden. Again, we know it. We've all had it. And you just drag. And it's like you'd just give up and die right now if you could. Christ carrying that cross is 100% completely and totally innocent. He does not know sin, therefore he does not know evil as something he has ever done. He's only experienced what evil can do to people. So he's carrying the weight, as we know, in the Garden of Gethsemane. He saw every single sin and evil deed from the beginning of time to the end. He saw all those who would benefit from his sacrifice, but we know also the devil threw up all those in front of him who would refuse to benefit from his sacrifice, who would refuse to accept it. So he's carrying that weight too. All this guilt, all this sin that is not his own to bear, for many who will be ungrateful and not even want it, that's the real heavy weight he carries on the way to Calvary. And to be there and to see this, that's the weight that's pulling him down. And that's the reason also he gets back up, because he knows he has to carry this burden all the way up to hell. You move to the next station, the fourth. Jesus meets his afflicted mother. Again, with John, she's one who was there through everything, but even more than John. She's the only person who was there at all these moments of Christ's life from the beginning to the end. And she's the only one who would understand in any sort of measurable way what Christ is actually going to, because Mary is also without sin, conceived without sin, the Immaculate Conception. So sin is that much more grievous, and evil is that much more painful on those who are innocent. They feel it much more than we do, because we've become used to it to some extent. When you've never done evil, never desired evil, the power that it places and the pain it inflicts on you is beyond measure. And so Mary and Jesus meet. Tradition tells us they say nothing. They just look at each other. And Mary knows why he's there. There's that song they sing at Christmas sometimes that I do not like because it's bad theologically. Mary, did you know? Yes, she knew exactly what was going on. The angel told her what would happen. The scriptures talked about it. It was not a surprise. She knew. And this is why she could be there at every single moment without raising a hand in objection. Archbishop Sheen tells us, he wrote once, that over the manger in Bethlehem stands the shadow of the cross. That's what that manger would lead to. That's what it was there for, was to lead to this cross. And so Mary knows very well this is what the goal is. This is why he came, is to make this ultimate sacrifice for the sake of us. And so her being there, this accompanying him, this moment they had together, again, can you think how difficult it would be, humanly speaking, to restrain yourself from trying to put an end to this? Most of us, when somebody we love is having a problem, we want to get involved. If that means I have to beat somebody up, so be it. If that means I have to do this or that, so be it. We're willing to go the extra mile for somebody that we really, truly love. And again, think about a mother and a child. That this is what she's confronted with. And she knows that there's nothing she can do or should do to stop it. To watch someone suffer so unjustly and so completely for something they did not do, but to understand at the same time that they, as divine as Christ is, his divine nature, has come here specifically for that her whole entire part of his life was to help bring him to this moment. That's why. in that moment to know that at least someone's there that understands somewhat what you're going through. That's what it meant to Christ. And that's one of the reasons why the church honors Mary so greatly. Because out of everyone else who was there, she's the only one who had any real, true, deep idea of what he was going through inside here. That's where the real horrible things were happening. And she knew that. And this is why there's just that moment where in silence they can stare at each other. And she walks, continues to go that whole way. I'll also keep that in mind. Mary's there at all these things. She's there when he's accused. She's there when the people choose Barabbas. She's there when he scourges the pillar. She's there when he's crowned with thorns. She's there when he picks up the cross. She's there when he falls down. She walks every single step of this way with him. And when all's said and done, there's what, 3, 4 people on Calvary? The 3 main ones being Mary, the mother of Jesus, John the Apostle, and Mary Magdalene. And so, as we're going through Lent, obviously Stations of the Cross is a typical Lenten devotion, but it's not only a Lenten devotion, keep that in mind, it's for all year round. And that we have stations every Friday at either here or St. Isidore, one or the other. It's a good opportunity for us to be there and to meditate on it and to think about that. Our role in all this, that it's my cross he's carrying, it's my face that should be in the dirt. It's me that should be wearing the crown of thorns because I've actually earned that. I've done the things that caused that. And yet he carries it still. And Mary walks that way. And John is a silent witness to all these things. And to think about how few people are left there to just accompany him on that road. Not to try to take the cross. Notice Mary did not try to prevent him from going further. Mary did not try to take the cross. John did not try to stop him from going. But just to be there, to go with him. To have at least some friendly, loving face on that way. That could be us. Every time we take part in the Stations of the Cross, it's telling the good Lord, this time there'll be one more person who understands what you're doing and why you're doing it, who appreciates the sacrifice you're making, who knows whose weight you are carrying, and it's mine. And to give him that little bit, at least, of our time and our effort. Again, because justly speaking, that should be us. But in his love and mercy, it's him. And Mary shows us that when we're having this pain inside as well, to whom we can take it. We can go to Christ with it because he knows, he understands, and to just be there and spend time with him